So this is how it's going to work. Matthew and Sarah, they're going to give us a quick update on what's happening with their service and what's currently available locally. Well, Louise asked you to send us your questions and you did send us loads. So we're going to go on to answer them. But because we want this webinar to be really useful, we might not get around to answering them all in the hour that we've got. But if we don't worry, we will answer your question. We'll respond to them all afterwards and we'll post them on the Parents Forum webpage and the Facebook pages. If you've got any questions as we're going along that you want to ask, there's a chat box at the top right hand of the screen. It looks like a speech bubble. If you type it in there, we will answer those afterwards and post them on our social media pages. Hopefully you're going to find it informative and useful. It is the first time we've done anything like this, so hopefully there won't be any glitches, but if they are, just bear with us as we go along. Brill. Right, so I'm going to hand you over to Matthew, who's going to tell us a little bit about his service.
Would help if I took your own advice and turned my mic off, really, wouldn't it? So yeah, thank you, Adele. My name's Matthew Hodder. So as Adele said, I'm the clinical service lead for one of the positive behaviour support services in Bradford. So I work with a charity called Affinity Trust, who are specialists in providing support to people with a learning disability. And my service was set up by Bradford and commissioned by Bradford to work with children who present such severe challenging behaviour that their children are likely to end up in residential care or CAMS units as a result of their behaviour. And so we were tasked with coming in and, through the use of PBS and intensive behavioural support services, supporting families with assessments and quite in-depth detailed intervention and PBS plans to sort of support parents and skill everybody up around that child so that we can effectively undermine and make that challenging behaviour not have a purpose anymore. And so we will work with families, but we also work across the board. So I'm a behavioural psychologist, so I cover all of the assessments and the oversight of the interventions. And then I have 5 members of staff, all of whom are allocated to one family for quite significant lengths of time and quite intensively. And their role is to then support that family to model PBS strategies to help them implement interventions. But then we also work across pretty much anywhere that child will go. So we will work at home, we'll work in community, we'll go to school, we'll go to short breaks units, effectively just making sure that absolutely everybody in that child's life is following the same plan, following the same strategies, so that challenging behaviour is no longer has as much of a purpose as it would normally. Things have gone very well so far. So far we're working with small numbers, but we've had 100% success rate so far at keeping children out of residential care, which has been very successful. And we've seen huge improvements in those children's ability to tolerate certain triggers, to be able to self-manage their behaviour. So on the whole, it's been a very successful pilot of a service, really. I'm quite happy with it. Is that all right, Adele? Do you need more? Or?
No, that's grand.
No?
Over to you, Sarah.
Hello, yes, I'm Sarah Burgess. I think in the introduction you gave me a bit of a promotion. So I'm team leader for the social, emotional and mental health team, who are part of the, lots of words coming, social communication and interaction and learning team, who are part of the specialist teaching and support services with Bradford Council. So I picked up from what Matthew was saying, that his is a pilot team. It sounds like our team has been around for considerable years in one guise or another. So I've been with the team for nearly 11 years. It's been in existence for at least a decade before I arrived in it, and it's evolved over the years to match the changing picture of education and specialist teaching requirements in the district all through those decades. So I'm a teacher, and in this role I'm a specialist teacher. My specialism is social, emotional and mental health. I say mental health, which might mean that we get a little confused with the likes of the children and the children's adolescent mental health service. We are not health professionals. We are simply called social, emotional and mental health because that's what the old title of behaviour, emotional and social difficulties is now called in the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice. So I must apologise to anybody who thinks I've just swallowed an alphabet or a dictionary and I'm using a million words, but basically we're a team of specialist teachers who support young people who are referred to us from schools in the district of Bradford. And we've got 4 team leaders. I'm one of them. The other 3 cover communication and interaction and autism spectrum conditions, cognition and learning conditions, including specific language difficulties, dyslexia, all of that kind of thing, and early years, anything and everything to do with preschool children. So our part of the service works with schools with young people that fit into all of those categories. So what we do is we will, if it's only on referral, we don't work with everybody. It just depends if the school for social, emotional and mental health, if they want us to go in because they're finding behaviour in school is challenging. And the usual way that we work is to meet everyone concerned. So we meet the parents, the families, the carers, and any professionals that might already be involved. And then we do some work in the school, which starts off with observations of the young person to see what's making the situation tick. So often we get young people who may go on eventually to have a diagnosis, or who may already have a diagnosis of any kind of neurodiversity, for example, such as ASD or ADHD. But we tend to be the pre-diagnosis bit, because if they do subsequently get a diagnosis of an autism spectrum condition, then they would then be looked after by our communication interaction branch. So our experience is looking at everything that parents are experiencing, but in school. We don't tend to go into the home, but we do see the other side of the coin about what happens to the young person once they're in the school setting. And of course, when we meet with parents, they often pick up tips and strategies and so on from what we're saying. And our raison d'etre is really to get everybody on the same page, so that schools and families can see what strategies are being in place, so that the young person at the heart of it gets an all-round diet of the same thing, of consistency throughout their lives. We also feed into the special educational needs system in the authority. So we will, sometimes young people are referred for statutory assessment, and there might be a document produced that used to be called a statement of special educational needs, but now it's called an educational health and care plan. So it might be that some of the young people who the parents and carers have offered questions about for this forum, some of them might be in that process already. Some of them might already have a specialist assessment that's already completed and might be in receipt of such a plan. And this plan might be being instigated in a school or a specialist setting. And we support that as well. We support helping the settings manage the young person with an education, health and care plan as well. So I don't want to spend too much time rambling on about all of that, but hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of where my professional expertise lies. And I'm hoping that it's the first time we've done this, I'm hoping that with Matthew, with his looking into the home and working very closely with families, we should be able to form a good 2 sides of a coin here, hopefully.
Brilliant, thanks for that. That's great. So if we move on to the questions, then I'll read them out, and I won't identify anybody. I'll just give the first name of the person who asked the question. So the first one is from Lorraine. My 12-year-old son's ASD is similar to that of many girls. He masks as per the behaviour he feels is expected, follow instructions even if he feels or thinks differently. Of course, very few people outside the home know how he really feels. He's been feeling sad inside and can't explain why. I'm usually good at getting him to sort through his feelings, but not this time. What can I do to support him?
So who's starting? Shall I go first? And Matthew can pick up.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
sure.
think that's kind of what we'd agreed, isn't it? We'll just crack on
Yeah.
like that.
So it seems to me that the essence of the question is helping him communicate his feelings, and the questioner is saying that they usually can manage this, but there's something happening now that means that that's not working so well. And it might well be useful to try and figure out what those triggers might be that have made him not so good at doing that now, and made the parent feel that they're not so good at supporting him now. It might be good to figure out what it is. Is it the COVID situation, for example, that's made him feel a lot more insular? So there are the usual types of strategies that you would use that I'm sure the parent is familiar with. So anything that you can do to help him make the feelings real or concrete. So any kind of visual strategies that you could use. If there are any cartoon characters, you could maybe get some together. You know, pictures of emojis or something, that kind of thing, so that of a few of the basic emotions, so that he's got a visual guide that he can use. There is an online resource, I don't know if you're aware of it, called Comic Strip Conversation, which is designed entirely to help young people who have the neurodiversity of autism spectrum condition to be able to communicate their feelings. And you can access that very easily online, and it gives you instructions on how to use it, and you can start to use that as a communication system. And it basically consists of helping the young person draw a little bit of a cartoon of what's happened, and you use various colour coding speech bubbles and thought bubbles to suggest what it might be that someone's thinking and what they're saying, and that way you've got a concrete visual way to start to get something to work on. The other ideas that I'd noted down was modelling feelings between different family members. So you can often say things like, get into the habit of saying things like, oh, I'm feeling a bit poorly today, I think I'll go and sit down. You wouldn't labour it, but you just make it a bit of a routine for family members to show him that we all have feelings and that we can mention them from time to time, and then there's an action that results from them. And the other thing that I was thinking was potentially getting into the habit of using scripts. So saying things like, I wonder if, let's say he's called Michael, I wonder if Michael is feeling poorly today because I think he looks a bit sad. You know, that kind of thing that might give him a step into being able to articulate what he's feeling. I don't know if Matthew wants to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered quite a lot of the stuff actually there, Sarah, that I was going to mention. So I suppose, just to sort of build upon what you said, is that my experience is that I suppose where the sort of emotional literacy is problematic, and there's that ability to maybe express emotions, for some people it's a moving baseline. So they can on one day be able to express their emotions, and then depending on certain circumstances, that ability can regress a bit. And I suppose given the current climate of the COVID-19 stuff, I think the general anxiety level of the entire population of the country has gone right up. And with that comes some of that kind of skill loss that's quite normal. I mean, some of the things that I was sort of thinking about, again, Sarah's mentioned some of them already, is that there is some real merit in labeling those emotions for that person. So sort of like Sarah said, Michael, I can see you looking sad. What can I do to help? And like you say, it just gives that little bit of a sort of light the fuse for them to kind of get them along the way, as to kind of that you're attending to them enough to recognize that emotion for them. And it gives them an opportunity to kind of think, actually, yeah, that is how I'm feeling. The other thing for me is the use of things like mood boards, very similar to the stories actually, around like visual use of different emotion cards. And with that comes those kind of conversations about those emotions, and that there is some real merit in acceptance of those emotions, because for some people where that emotional literacy is a little limited, is to sort of say, well, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel anxious, I feel anxious sometimes. It kind of just gives that realization that they're not the only person that can feel that emotion. And there is a lot of resources out there. If you were to Google emotional literacy resources, autism, there is usually quite a lot of pre-made visuals and things that would be supportive there. The other thing that I've found previously helpful for people who are sort of saying, like you said, Lorraine, in your example there about feeling sad inside, is that getting people to kind of have that conversation about emotions. So I've done exercises where I've sat down with someone and said, right, list me 3 things that haven't gone well for you today. And that could be minor things, but then you lead that conversation on to, right, now tell me 3 things that have gone well for you today. And what you're doing is you're reframing that emotional state a little bit, but also it can be really minor things. It could just be that they helped make a cup of tea that morning with you, or they quite liked the leaf that they found on their walk. But it's just little things to reframe that emotional state, and it brings that sort of mood state of being sad a lot of the time inside to kind of looking for other things that we might find happiness in, which is quite an important factor, I think.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is from Rashna. I know my son can't control his anger, but when he lashes out physically, who am I supposed to contact in an emergency, as the situation is equivalent to domestic violence? I can't call the police because then he would get a criminal record at an early age for something he cannot help.
I think there's a few key things there. First of all, I was interested in what it is that makes Flashman know that he can't control his anger, because people, at whatever conditions they have, they do need to learn to control their anger, particularly if the anger becomes explosive or destructive, and causes harm to people, whether they be in the family unit or whether they be outside the unit. So we will need to learn some ways of controlling that. On the topic of the calling the police, it's a very personal decision that the parent or carer has to make, but the police are there to support in this situation. And I was interested that that Rashna said that she feels it's equivalent to domestic violence, and it really is important to explore that notion if that is what the situation is. I did make a few notes on this on the let me just get to my notes on that particular topic on there we go. So nobody, whoever they are, whether it is the mother of a younger person or the parent of a younger person, has to put up with domestic violence. And it would be important, again, it's your choice, but it would be important to phone the police in that situation. And if the violence has become normalized, it might feel as if it's an everyday thing and it happens regularly in anyone's particular household, but it isn't. It isn't the right thing, it isn't normal, it isn't acceptable. And with him being, I don't think it says what age he is, but my son is actually a police officer, and he said that beneath the age of 16, he would not be classed as a criminal anyway, even though the criminal age is technically above 10. The police would be sensitive to this, and we wouldn't get a criminal record unless it went to court and unless the parent or carer pressed charges. And the police would be helpful for that, because what's often happened, if you think about the domestic violence situation again, presumably the violence has become normalised, it's escalated, and it's an escalating pattern of violence. And if it's beyond the power of the parent or the family to manage that, and they're becoming the victims of this, it does need to see that this is actually something where there is somebody who can have some support available to help that stop. One of the there is a lot of advice online about that as well that you could look at. But it's important for him to see that there would be a consequence. I was also thinking about ways of helping him diffuse his anger within the household as well. So that was the issue of phoning the police. But he should be able to manage his violence and his anger and prevent it from resorting in violence anyway. So ways that you could manage that is to teach him when he's calm that there is somewhere that he can go if he starts to feel like that. He doesn't have to stay with you in your area. He can go to his room, or he can go in the garden or wait outside, or take himself away from the situation. And it depends, if he is actually going along the route of wanting to hurt you, then that is the domestic violence route, and I think it would be helpful to call the police then. Where were they? Yeah, I think somewhere along the line he does need to learn that it isn't okay to hurt others, and there are consequences to that. I don't know if Matthew wants to step in on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in terms of who do you contact in an emergency, I think I'm not going to touch that area because you've very comfortably answered that, Sarah, and there's nothing more to add to that. In terms of kind of that idea of like Rashna said about, I know my son can't control his anger, fully support what Sarah's saying there, is that there is no indefinite scale to that. Yes, all right, that person may not be able to control their anger right now. That does not mean that there is not things you can do to support them to control their anger in the future. And that is about, sadly, there's no quick fix to that. There's no sort of magic tablet or golden bullet that will just fix that sort of a situation. And it is about kind of graft and work, and sadly, a lot of analysis of your child. And I think when I've previously delivered parents training with Julie Bruce and things like that, it's something that we talk about quite a lot, is as a parent, it's learning to take your parent hat off, even just for 10 minutes at a time, and put an observer hat on. And what you're looking for is what is it that your child is doing as a behavior. And we've mentioned about physical lashing out, but then what we need to look at as well is what is starting that behavior, what are the key triggers that are setting that behavior off, and also what is it that your child is trying to either get out of that situation or avoid out of that situation. Is it they're trying to get food? Is it that they're trying to get your attention? Is it that you've put a demand on them and they don't want to do that right now? What we need to understand is why that situation is happening, and with that you can then start, like Sarah said, to think about strategies to help your child understand that when those triggers come in, what better things could I do to manage my internal state than lash out at you. So I think Sarah's answered the reactive element of that question of who do you contact in an emergency perfectly. I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on that proactive management of that situation, about the longer term elements. I'm not suggesting for a second that's going to be a quick fix, but I think it would be worth starting to think about kind of those things. And I'm sure that when COVID is over, or whether that's done by video lecturing, I will be doing parents training again, and that covers a very large amount of why we analyze behavior and how to analyze behavior. So I would recommend sort of attending something like that if you felt that was appropriate.
Cool. The next question is from Catherine. How do I deal with a child who on a daily basis uses threatening behavior towards myself and his dad? He threatens to kill, stab and wishes us dead all the time, plus screams and shouts the place down and can damage things. My concerns are that this is getting out of hand as he gets older and becomes stronger. He had started to behave like this with other members of the family and school before the lockdown. This is having a major effect on our well-being, as I'm now on antidepressants.
I think what's quite interesting about this process is that we're in at the moment with this webinar is that we're starting to build up a picture of how you manage behaviour. And I think all of the things that Matthew said previously about looking at the triggers and why a person might be behaving, what they're getting out of the behaviour, this is classic behavioural management fodder. So it's often very difficult. We often encourage schools to look for the triggers and that kind of thing. So everything that Matthew previously said about triggers pertaining to the other situation would be pertinent to this one. And again, this sounds like it might be a young person who might be getting on the continuum, or might be at risk of getting on the continuum of being on the domestic abuse ladder. So in a way, there are many, the answer to this is very similar to the answer to the previous question, but something I'd like to build on with it as well is for those concerned who are becoming potential victims of the abuse, it's really, really important for them to make sure that they get some kind of relief and support so that their life isn't just relentless. So Catherine says that she's on antidepressants now. So it's clearly at a very critical stage where she's gone to the GP and sought medical assistance. And I think it's very important to look at all the other kinds of, I'm going to say the word respite, but I don't mean necessarily the young person goes to live somewhere else, but I mean Catherine being able to take some respite from the situation herself. So making sure that there are times during the day that she can go somewhere else, perhaps, and have a break herself. And she remembers herself in the middle of all of this, as a person whose heart feeling good situation